Okay, welcome back everyone to my podcast on the future of business and technology. And today's topic is AI and wine. And there are some days when I just love my job, especially when I can combine two of my favorite passions, AI and fine wine. My guest today is Matt Crafton, who is the winemaker at the famous Chateau Montelena in Napa Valley, California. Welcome.
Thanks so much for having me. Happy to be here.
It's so good to have you with us. So, for anyone listening who might not know the story, can you share how Chateau Montelena helped put Napa Valley on the world wine map and what makes your wines distinctive?
Absolutely. So, Chateau Montelena was founded in 1882. We're located in Calistoga at the northern end of the Napa Valley. We were founded by a gentleman named Alfred Tubbs, who is a California state senator. And over the preceding 40 or so years, Chateau Montelena grew into one of the largest wineries in California. Sadly, like sadly, prohibition reared its ugly head, and like so many other wineries in California and in the United States, Chateau Montelena shut down and essentially existed as a ghost winery in various flavors until 1972, when Jim Barrett purchased the winery and the vineyard and the name and restarted Chateau Montelena. And so, since 1972, we have been owned by the Barrett family. Jim's son Bo is my boss, and the event you're referring to was in 1976. Our second vintage, the 1973 Chardonnay, was featured at a blind tasting in Paris by a gentleman named Steven Spurrier, who is running a wine school there. And for an educational event or publicity stunt, depending on how you look at it, he decided to pit these upstart American brands from California against some of the greatest French wines of all time from Bordeaux and Burgundy. And this competition, this tasting, was conducted blind by the top French enologists and chefs. And much to everyone's surprise, the American wines won. We won for Chardonnay, and Stag's Leap Wine Cellars won for Cabernet Sauvignon. And that really did ignite the American wine revolution. And I think the realization that great wine can be made outside of the old world.
Absolutely. Maybe you can paint us a picture of the estate and the different wines you make.
Sure. So we farm approximately 100 acres up here on our estate. And I've been in wine production for, gosh, over 20 years now. And I can tell you that this is one of the most special growing sites in the entire world. And I have a very fortunate opportunity to get, how would I call it? Let's just say that the direction I get from our ownership is simply to make wines that are delicious and ageable. So I guess I have a lot of leeway. That's the word I was looking for. And so I really focus on essentially that. It's a very different way of looking at winemaking compared to what many of the wines most people are familiar with, where we don't actually at all focus on a specific flavor profile. We don't focus on uniformity between vintages. We're not looking to show you the same wine every single year. Instead, we work very hard to hide ourselves and instead show off and magnify the best parts of every vintage and the vineyard itself. So it's an incredibly challenging job, but it really allows us to flex our creative muscles. And at the same time, we have to put on our technician hats too, to be able to make sure that these wines can age for 25, 35, 45, 50 years.
Great. So before we get into AI and tech, I'd love to get your perspective on some of the biggest challenges premium wine producers are facing today and how you see the industry evolving.
Well, I think One way I look at it is that I don't really think there's a single wine industry, and I think you alluded to it by qualifying and referring to specifically to premium wine producers. So the quote unquote wine industry is made up of everyone from the grocery store brands who focus on economies of scale, all the way to the ultra premium and luxury brands. I mean, we all have our own challenges. The truth is, American per capita consumption of alcohol, be it beer, wine, spirits, hasn't really changed a whole lot in the last 40 years. People are certainly drinking more wine in general. I think the statistic I read was in the 1980s, like 1 in 5 American families drank wine, and now we've doubled to 2 in 5. So it's that's progress. But I think the challenges that we're facing are really going to be just continuing to make wine appealing to Americans, where we don't really have a history necessarily, or at least a long history of wine drinking from a social perspective, and certainly not from a culinary perspective, unfortunately. So there's an education piece to this, and I think there's uh, with the boomer generation starting to kind of phase out and maybe drink less wine than they did in the past, making sure that the Gen X and millennials and Gen Z are interested in wine is something that we really need to focus on.
And the industry is often seen as very traditional. What's driving the need for technological innovation in winemaking?
I think competition's a really good thing. It can be. Just in Napa Valley alone, there are 400 plus wineries, and I think all of us, there's a strong sense of camaraderie, where we do want to see the Napa Valley succeed. We want to see the wine industry succeed, but at the same time, our individual businesses need to succeed also. Chateau Montelena doesn't have any external funding. We don't have any oil money behind the brand. There's no tech money. We didn't invent a heart stent. There's nothing like that. We only make money when our customers pull corks. So we have to continue to produce wines that are compelling and delicious. And I think part of it, I think it's also there's a very American concept of just this sense of optimism and this idea of progression and growth. Sadly, I don't see it as much in Europe in many areas, but we still firmly believe we haven't made our best wines yet, and that the way that we're going to do so is through a better understanding of our place, of our climates, of our equipment, of our grapevines. And so it's in that vein of becoming better at what we do that necessitates the technological investment that you just referred to.
Yeah, which sets us up really nicely to talk about AI.
Mm.
And I'd love you to walk us through how real-time vine monitoring works and how it influences your daily decisions.
Yeah, so I think AI in the wine industry is still at its infancy. If we think about how AI is applied in 2024, the large language models that we see in ChatGPT or Perplexity and all these other places, they really haven't filtered down into the wine industry yet. The data sets really aren't that good. So most of the algorithms that we use and what you referred to, in terms of vine monitoring and those things, are very, very rudimentary, but the potential is there. So, one piece of technology we use, it's a riff on essentially facial recognition software, and so we're able to use our iPhone cameras and essentially walk down a vineyard row taking a video of the vine's canopy. And the company we work with, they take all those images, upload it to their server, and then based on data they have, where they can recognize how the leaf angles change based on sun exposure, and they can correlate that to vine water stress, they can spit out a number to us that approximates vine water stress in real time. And so it's not a direct measurement. It is based off of an algorithm, and the models do continue to get better every year. But they're still in their infancy. Like, for instance, it works with certain varieties, not with others. Trellis systems are very specific, and then also vine age also is another variable. So we're very happy to be at the forefront, the tip of the spear with this, but we're not pretending it's a panacea yet. We understand that what we're getting is just, kind of the very beginning. And it's one of those situations where you're like, all right, if it's right most of the time, that's interesting. Is it really quite actionable yet? Maybe, maybe not. But it's exciting to see where the technology is going.
Yeah, and it's a technology that's is just making its way into farming and agriculture, and I guess winemaking is
Yes,
just a natural
yes,
next step. You're using aerial imaging and
that's right.
AI to
That's right.
monitor ripening patterns. So
Yes.
I'd love to know how this has changed your approach to harvest timing, grape selection, any of those?
Yeah, and I think that's probably one area where I think the AI component is most advanced. I think when we look at it, it does a great job at pattern recognition, at least right now, and on aerial photos. So if you picture the way to think about it is some of these services use physical airplanes, some of them use drones now, but essentially they're taking a snapshot from a specific altitude of your vineyard. And cameras, as you know, are just so incredibly powerful and detailed right now. So they're
Mm,
getting these high resolution photos of our vineyard. And based on the wavelength of the photographs, so we're talking about, you and I see invisible wavelength, there's ultraviolet, there's infrared. Depending upon the wavelength of the photograph, they're able to pick out individual anomalies in the photos on the vine to vine level. And so, what does that mean? That could mean potentially water stress in a certain area. That's really that's not really super new. That's been around for a few years. But where the AI piece comes in, which is really interesting, is that we're starting to get notifications afterwards saying, "Hey, we noticed that these four vines in this one specific row are more stressed slightly than the vines adjacent to them. You may have a clogged drip emitter, or you may have a clogged drip line, something that we would have to walk eventually and see, or something we wouldn't be able to notice until there were significant deleterious effects on the health of the grapevine for us to notice. Using AI now with these aerial images, we're getting these little nudges saying like, "Hey, go out to row 45 and head about 8 vines in and double check that emitter is working, or double check that drip line hasn't been cut," or something like that. And so it's being able to recognize these subtle changes that would require tremendous amounts of man hours to be able to determine. And now we get, like I said, a little bit of a nudge from the software that reads these AI images, reads these aerial images for us.
that's very cool.
Hmm.
Um, you've recently gone through a major replanting project, and I
Hmm.
believe you used AI and solar data to help you make decisions that could impact wine quality for decades to come. Do you want to share that?
Yeah, absolutely. And so we're in the middle of the largest replant of the Montelena estate since it was originally planted by Jim Barrett in the early 1970s. So it's been 50 years, and it's quite a significant responsibility, as you can imagine.
Mhm.
And so over time, the Bordelaise will tell you that it takes essentially three successive plantings until you really know your piece of ground. And I think that's, roughly correct. Over the last 50 years, things haven't been static here. We've replaced individual blocks on a case by case basis, but this was for the first time that we took a fundamental holistic understanding of our vineyard and looked at what are the right grape varieties in each individual soil. And we were able to dig down to literally, all the way down through the earth using soil pits and cores, selecting, the right rootstock, the right trellis, the right variety, the right clone. And one thing you mentioned, what was row angle. For those of your viewers who've visited any wine growing region, you're driving down the road and you look at the vineyard rows, and the vast majority of the time, the rows are planted perpendicular to the road you're driving on. And
Mhm.
that makes for ease of farming, essentially, is the reason for that. But there's no other logic behind that. In California here, the people who set out the roads are the California Department of Transportation, Caltrans. they don't really care about farming. They put a road wherever they want. So it seems kind of silly that you would orient your rows, your vineyard rows, based off of the road that Caltrans puts in your backyard or in your community. And so our fundamental question was, well, is there an optimal row orientation for the latitude that we farm here in Calistoga? And the answer is yes. We were kind of surprised to see that. The idea essentially was to try to determine using weather data and solar data. And when I say solar, I mean the position of the sun in the sky, essentially model using AI where the sun is in the sky on the hottest day of the year at the hottest time of the year. So for us in California, that's typically end of July, solar noon, 2, 3 o'clock in the afternoon. And for those of you that know about grape growing, obviously, or maybe not obviously, but for those of you that know something about grape growing, the mantra is that dappled sunlight on your grape berries is a very good thing. Too much sunlight, it's just like what happens when we go out into the beach onto the beach without any sunblock when we get burned. Too little sunlight, and you can end up with a vine that's excessively vegetal in flavor. And so it's this idea of dappled sunlight. And so using AI and using weather, climate data, and then again solar positioning data, we determined that we should orient our rows approximately 25 degrees east of true north. And what that does is on the quote unquote warmest days of the year, at the end of July, around 2 to 3 o'clock in the afternoon, the sun is actually shining directly on top of the canopy in our vineyard rather than shining onto the fruit itself. And what we've seen is that that what seems like it might be somewhat insignificant, like why does it matter if there's a little extra or a little less sunlight? We've seen a 10 to 15 degrees Fahrenheit berry delta in temperature between berries that are in direct sunlight at the hottest time of the day versus berries that are in shade. And so, why does that matter? Well, all of the really beautiful aromatics, the phenolics, the tannins that you taste, all of those wonderful flavors are very, very sensitive to heat. And so they need heat and they need sunlight to develop, but too much is
Mm.
not a good thing. And they'll actually start to degrade if they get too hot. And you can end up with a wine that's essentially, insipid, flavorless, boring, whatever pejorative term you want to use. And so we really try to avoid that. And so one effective solution to that is to, again, reorient our rows. So if you come visit the Montelena estate here and you drive down our vineyard roads, you'll see that our vines are angled horizontal now to the road. But we've had, I think, we have 2 vineyard blocks that we planted in 2018 that are now in full production using this new system. And I can tell you the fruit is absolutely dynamite. It's working as designed. It's absolutely amazing.
That's fantastic.
Mhm.
Such a great example.
Mhm.
Have you had any other surprises or learnings from integrating AI into vineyard management?
I think what we've been able to do is by planning ahead, using data and asking the right questions, we've surprisingly been able to lower or decrease the number of hours we have to spend doing canopy work by hand. So if you can picture a grapevine, vertically on a vertically shoot position, trellis, we have to tie the shoots up, make them vertical. We keep the fruit zone somewhat shaded. And in the past, depending upon how the rows were oriented or the rootstock we used, if there was too much vigor, we had to send hand crews through to remove leaves, or maybe we had to add shade cloth or something like that. Essentially, we had to use people to ameliorate the bad decisions we'd made early on, or maybe not bad decisions, but maybe let's say ignorant ones. And so by trying to find these optimal solutions for very specific problems like heat or let's say drought or those sorts of things, we've been able to essentially set the vineyard up for success and really mitigate the amount of amelioration we have to do. That can mean, we've been able to decrease the number of hours we've had to spend on canopy management by hundreds of hours in certain parts of these blocks. That's better for the crews because they're not out there in the blinding heat. It's better for the fruit. The winery saves money. So it's been a win-win all the way around by utilizing these technologies early on in the development process.
Yeah, great. You mentioned earlier that the whole wine industry is still very early on in its adoption of AI technology.
Mhm.
I'd love to get your view on where else you see applications of AI in the wine industry.
So I look at it in a few different ways. I think let's start off with my world, which is I'm most familiar with. Obviously, for me, we generate, and when I say my world, I mean the premium or luxury wine world. Um, we generate incredible amounts of data. And I tease my coworkers that a lot of our data is what I call WARN data, WORN. Are you familiar with that acronym?
Mm,
So it's write once, read never. And
mhm,
we see that coming off of our tanks. We generate temperature data, fermentation data, all of these things, and it can be a lot to sort through. And unfortunately, I think there is this idea that more data are better all the time, but the reality is that it just gets overwhelming very quickly.
mm,
So what I'm hoping is that with some of the newer AI technology, we'll be able to sort through that so that the actionable data, like we're seeing in the vineyard with the aerial photographs and some of the vine watering, the vine watering systems, or the water the vine water status monitoring systems. I'm hoping that will move its way into the winery,
mm,
so that we can actually focus on what's truly actionable, what needs our attention, and what doesn't. And by not having to constantly just spend time watching everything, sometimes fruitlessly, it'll give the winemaking team more time to do the creative parts of the business and the creative parts of winemaking that I think our customers really expect and appreciate. Likewise, is one kind of uh, tedious part of our business is in record keeping and
mhm,
compliance. We are a very heavily regulated industry, and we spend an inordinate amount of time filing various reports, paperwork, briefs at the county, state, and federal level. And most of that is mind numbing, and most of it, I'd say, is superfluous. And there is, thankfully, I was talking to actually a gentleman last night who's developing new database software that I'm very interested in that will essentially automate and allow AI to populate those data for us and submit those reports with very little human interaction. So, in my mind, in the premium and luxury side, I'm hoping AI will allow us to uh, identify the data that are most actionable, that need our attention, and then two, take away those parts of wine production that are essentially simple and repeatable, um, so that we can focus on the more complicated, the more artistic, the more creative tasks to deliver better wines to our customers. On the other side of the industry, let's say on the grocery store wine side of it, where the focus really is on making very repeatable wines. That's where every vintage tastes the same, where the flavor profile is consistent year over year. I think in those situations, AI can absolutely help in streamlining and building out those specific flavor profiles and may actually be able to assist in blending and
mm,
developing those wines for consistency. I have friends that work in that space who make millions of cases of, let's say, white Zinfandel, for instance. It's a really hard job because they're getting fruit from hundreds of different vineyards every year, different climates, different maturities,
mm,
different color, different flavor, and they have to craft all of those disparate parts into something that's uniform year after year after year because their customers expect that consistent flavor profile. It's a really hard job. I think AI will be able to, I imagine AI in the near future will be able to help assist in identifying those key characteristics, maybe those aromatic components or flavor precursors or whatever they are, and assist the winemaker in putting together the recipe, so to speak, to be able to make those wines year in, year out. So those are, I mean, those are in the future, but if I had to put my, look into my crystal ball, those are two ways we could go for sure.
Yeah, do you think there's a role in assisting the blending process even for premium wines? Because I had a guest on my show, a whiskey maker of
Mhm.
premium whiskies, and they actually created an AI blend. So there was a blend that the AI suggested because they have lots of different barrels and they need to make some commercial decisions, some blending decisions, some taste decisions. And the AI looked at all of this data and then said, okay, why don't you produce this blend? And then the winemaker basically works together with the AI to create the perfect blend. Do you see that happening?
It's a good question. Maybe, I think right now AI doesn't actually create. Aside from the supernatural, there are really only two things in the universe that create, and one is evolution, and the other one is human beings. Right now, AI, it kind of seems like it creates, but it doesn't. Once we get to the point where AI starts disobeying us, um, and AI says, "No, I'm not going to do this. I'm going to do this." I think we've kind of reached a different plateau. But for now, so much of the premium wine industry and the luxury wine industry, um, it revolves around this concept of a single creative expression on the wine side.
Mm,
And I think it's that fundamental point of view of being able to take something, and whether it's creating knowledge or creating a point of view or creating an explanation that hasn't been thought of before. um, Humans are the only ones right now that can do that. Your whiskey example is an interesting one because I have a former colleague, former protege who works in the whiskey space now, and she's absolutely fantastic. And that is a big part of her job, is coming up with new whiskeys for their brand, and they're actually moving into the tequila space also. But she's a very different, a very fundamental perspective that I think is what makes her so good, is that she came from the wine side of the business, not from the whiskey side of the business. And so maybe she um, doesn't have the same commercial requirements that your previous guest did, but from a creative standpoint, she puts together some of the most beautiful whiskeys in the world. Very few of them are repeatable, but I think that's why they value her so much, is because she comes from the winemaking perspective that she has.
yeah, and I think this is so important in the wine industry that we maintain the creative element and the tradition and blend it with the best of AI without overshadowing any
Mhm.
of the essence of what makes amazing wine.
Yeah, I would agree. It will be, and it can be a wonderful tool for all of us to use.
So beyond AI, then you've implemented some fascinating sustainability and technology solutions that go beyond AI. Can you share some of those?
Sure. So I think for us, any of those solutions, whether they're technological or sustainability related, they have to come back to people, place, and profit. So are they good for our workers? Are those solutions good for the land? And are they good for the brand? Like, can the company continue to succeed? So that's really the lens we look for. And so we've mentioned a few of them already regarding measuring vine water status, our aerial work, the redevelopment work we're doing. We're working with a new rootstock out of UC Davis that is extremely drought and pest and disease tolerant. So we're really excited about that, looking at that for the future. And then likewise, inside the cellar, so much of the technology that we've developed has really been there to allow more granularity in how we make wine. So if you can picture, if we were engineers and we were looking on how to build a brewery or a winery, we would obviously think about, well, what's the process? What's the standard operating procedure for how we make our beer or our wine? And there's nothing fundamentally wrong with that. But here at Montelena, as I mentioned, in terms of trying to deliver that sense of transparency from the vintage and also from the vineyard itself, we focus not necessarily on standard operating procedure, but more about how do we capitalize on the individual characteristics of every single pick, every single lot we have. And so that's where we've invested our technology into that, so that every single lot has the ability to be treated completely different from any other one that comes in. So what does that mean? Well, so if you were to come and visit us 15 years, let's see, 2011, so 13 years ago, you would have seen 20 10-ton fermenters, all the same. And that's what we had. And it worked well. We made great wine for 40 years, essentially using that winery. But in 2011, we rebuilt essentially the production facility here at Montelena with the understanding, and it was based on data on how we pick this property. So we went from 20 10-ton fermenters to 48 fermenters, various sizes from 2 tons all the way up to 12 tons, essentially based on how this property gets picked year over year. And then every single tank can be independently operated. They can be heated, they can be cooled. Without getting too geeky into winemaking, we can handle the cap maceration. So the pump overs can all be handled independently. They can all be pre-programmed. Essentially, what we try to do is we try to let the robots and the technology do the dumb, repeatable things, the things that robots do really, really well. So I can
Mm.
free up my people to think about like how to make good decisions, how to think ahead, how to plan. And so it's a very symbiotic relationship where the technology enables my workers to do their job better. And at the same time, by us planning ahead in terms of how we pick and process and those things, we put technology in the seat to help us continue to succeed. So it's a virtuous cycle that continuously reinforces itself overall. But as I mentioned again, it has to be good for our employees. Does it make the wine better? Does it make our jobs easier? Is it good for the planet? Is it good for our piece of ground? We really take our stewardship very seriously. We're committed as a brand, and I know the Barretts are as a family, to leave this place better than how we found it. And then finally, as I mentioned at the beginning, since the only way we make money is when our customers pull corks, we have to continue to make sure this brand stays profitable and the wine stays better, or wine tastes better. So all of those things go together in determining where we invest our money in technology.
Yeah, there's so many lessons that are so easily transferable to other businesses. I think
Mhm,
lots of the points you make are so valid for pretty much
mhm.
every business. There's a slight risk that we go into the geeky territory because
Sure.
I'm a wine nerd, but
Great.
you've introduced a new cork technology as well that optimizes oxygen transfer. So I'd love to know how this innovation impacts the aging potential and quality of your wines.
It's a great question. So there are only two things that touch your wine, if you think about it. So you buy a bottle of wine, you have the glass or container, whatever it is. I guess now you can get wine in boxes and cans and all sorts of things. But if you're in a bottle, all you have is the glass and then whatever stopper you use on top. And that can be a cork, it can be a screw cap. There are probably a half dozen different stoppers that are available on the market. And
Mm.
we've understood that there's no use in spending millions of dollars and developing a vineyard and paying me and our whole crew and all the love and attention and taking care of our wine only to put a substandard piece of bark or whatever on top of your bottle, and then god forbid the person who gets this bottle opens it and says, it's bad, or something's wrong, or the nightmare scenario, which it keeps me up at night, is somebody buys a bottle, a special bottle for their anniversary. They want to save it for 50 years, or they buy it for their children's birthday. And then they open it up and there's there's cork taint, there's a flaw, there's something. And we've worked very, very hard over my time here. And I know since the very beginning at Montelena to allay those concerns. But up until I'd say the last 10 years or so, there really hasn't been a very strong fundamental option for us that serves the dual purpose um, of long aging, but also adequate mechanical and operational protection. So I'll dig into that a little bit deeper. So we've always been in traditional punched cork, and the sad thing is, well, the great thing about traditional punched cork is that it's a natural product, and the challenge is that it's a natural product. And so the cork companies have really come a long way in solving some of the cork taint issues that were discovered and have been prevalent essentially since the late 1980s. But there's still a lot of work to be done. We've moved over to a new closure from a company called Diom, which is based out in France. Um, and what they do is they take the natural cork cells, the magic cells that provide that nice sponginess that holds on to the sides, the finish of your bottle, and they wash those cork cells with supercritical CO2. And during that process that they strip out any impurities or any chemicals that could possibly impact the flavor or aromas of your wines. And that technology has been around for a while. But what DM's been able to do is they've been able to do it in a way, and they've modeled this actually using AI of all things. They've been able to model essentially the development and the maturation of the cork in your bottle, where um, they're confident enough, and we are too, in seeing the data that each individual closure, in addition to being 100% clean, comes with a 30-year integrity guarantee, which is pretty amazing when you think about it. Like, there's nothing else in like the food space that's made to last for 30 years, and it's a really long time. And we did a lot of due diligence in testing all of the different closures out there, from screw caps to glass tops to everything in between, looking at what the best options would be for us. And so, as I alluded to, there was the aspect of obviously clean cork material, that longevity guarantee, and then we really like having an internal closure. So a cork fits inside your bottle, right? And it's in contact with the inside of that bottle all the way around. Whereas a screw cap just sits on top, and it's a very thin sheet of aluminum. And I don't know about you, but I watched the UPS guy kick packages up my driveway with some frequency, and sometimes I wonder if a screw cap will hold up as well. So there's an operational piece of this that's important. That's why we wanted to stick with a cork, internal closure. We like the heritage of cork. We like the natural magic that is the cork cell, but we wanted to get the best of both worlds, where we have something that's perfectly clean. And so we moved over to these new corks. I believe it was the 2014 reds and 2015 whites. So we would have bottled those about 8 years ago. And it's been absolutely fantastic. I don't have to worry about bottles that may have, uh, when you open them, you may have worried about cork taint or something like that. There's no contamination or anything like that. And just to be clear, like, there's nothing in there that can like physically hurt you, but it's really stinks when you open a bottle of wine and you're like, oh man, this is not good. Something is wrong here. So you get we we feel very spoiled that we don't have to worry about that anymore, which is great.
No, this is very good. I bought a 1988 Chateau Angelus, and it was corked, and that was devastating.
It's brutal, and there's no way
Yeah,
you can tell beforehand. I mean,
no.
it's just luck of the draw. And we have a very deep library also. We have wines going back to the 70s, and it's 1 in 100 maybe, but you don't want to be that one, fortunately.
So as you blend this traditional expertise with new technologies, how do you see the role of winemaker evolving?
Ooh, that's a good question. I think we have to be. So again, I'm only speaking for people in my position, in my part of the industry. So we're a small family brand, and we're very used to wearing a lot of hats, so to speak. Um, I think the way I see winemaker, the role evolving is in a way that expands outside the walls of the winery to make very, very compelling wine today. There is that extremely hackneyed saying, great wine is made in the vineyard. And I think there certainly is some truth to that. I think there's absolutely no question you cannot make great wine without great fruit. And so much of the work that we're doing here that I think has allowed us to continue to improve the quality of Montelena wines has been based on how we share information between winemaking and the vineyards. And so the more time I spend out there looking for the characteristics that I think are important to making world-class wines here, and at the same time inviting my vineyard manager to come in and taste tanks with me during harvest, the better we share information and the more we understand that, my input and my role does not stop at the walls of the winery. And at the same time, he gets to experience the results of his decisions in the vineyard, hopefully the decisions we made together. And you do that not only in a qualitative way, just again, physically tasting a tank, but also backing that up with data and looking at, color intensity, tannin quantities, those sorts of things, aromatic precursors that we can measure now. And all of that reinforces back to what we're doing in the vineyard. And so I think from an operational standpoint, the people that are going to continue to push the envelope from a quality standpoint have to be extremely familiar with both disciplines. We have to know soil science, we have to know geology, we have to know plant physiology, in addition to what we do inside with fermentation science.
Very good. What emerging technologies are you most excited about when we look at the future of premium winemaking? What else do you see on the horizon that you think could have an impact on the industry?
I think most of the technology that I've seen in the last 5 years has been more evolutionary than revolutionary. That doesn't mean it's bad. I think the AI piece has the potential to be revolutionary, but we're still in its infancy.
Mm,
One thing that we've keyed on is just the nature of how much mechanization has improved in the last decade. And it's not a very sexy topic, but it's the reality of the world we live in right now. We've done trials with some of these brand new mechanical harvesters coming out of Europe, and the fruit they pick with onboard sorting is just absolutely remarkable. It's as good or sometimes even better than some of our hand-picked fruit. So that's really exciting.
mm,
The other piece of it has to do, I think, more with a sense of precision on the farming side. So as we spoke about in the beginning with our aerial flyovers, we're not, it used to be that, okay, well, we see a problematic area, a nutrient deficiency in one part of the vineyard. Well, up until recently, we'd have to essentially, fertilize or apply compost or whatever your favorite ameliorative agent would be to the entire vineyard block. Now the technology is there essentially to do this on a vine by vine basis. And that level of precision, that level of granularity, and the technology that allows us to do so, I think is what's going to continue to allow us to push quality. And the best part about this, I think that a lot of people forget, is that so much of the technology that we develop here in grape farming, in winemaking, this eventually filters its way down to the rest of the agricultural world. So wine's in a very privileged place because we're able to, we charge a lot of money for our agricultural products. Our customers have very high standards, but there's no doubt that we charge a lot of money for a bottle of fermented grape juice.
mm,
And so as a result, we're able to use those dollars to help further develop and advance research and technology to help make our vineyards more sustainable, more healthy, to increase quality. And then that will eventually, what starts here in Napa Valley, will work its way to the Central Valley in California, then to Oregon and Washington, then Virginia, then to Australia and the rest of the world. And then it'll eventually filter down to row crops as well. So it's neat to see that some of the technology that has been developed in the wine industry over the last decade is now starting to make impacts in other agricultural sectors.
So, for any wine lovers listening, how do you think technology will change their wine drinking experience in the coming years?
There's a lot of gimmicks out there. I every time I travel, I get people who are like, "Hey, I bought this new tchotchke thing that supposedly does A, B, and C." And I used to have this like sense of revulsion, being like, "Oh my gosh, don't do that." But at the same time, I think the way I look at it is it making you happy? Like, are you having fun with it? Like, are you using some fancy whirly aerator and it looks cool and it percolates and it bubbles? And if that makes you happy and that makes you enjoy the wine that much more, that's fantastic. I really try to bring it all back to that. At the end of the day, like we're in the business of making people happy, and yes, it's I meet a lot of aspiring sommeliers who are digging in on a depth that I just absolutely blows my mind. And these tiny little intricacies of various growing regions and varieties. But I really try to draw it back to use technology to help make your experience more enjoyable more than anything else. Corvin's a really good example of that, I think, where people are able to open wines, have a glass and then go back to it. I don't think the technology is perfect,
Mm.
but I think it's certainly better than not having it. Um, so I think any piece of technology that makes great wine more accessible to people or helps folks enjoy their wine even more, I'm 100% in favor of, even if it does have a slight placebo effect. So
No, I agree, and I feel that AI is making the choice of which wine to choose easier with apps like Vivino. I had the founder of Vivino on my podcast, and
sure.
we discussed how they use AI to help people guide through the sometimes very confusing world of wine.
Wine is confusing and it's
Mm,
intimidating and it doesn't need to be.
No, I agree. In the end, it's all about what you enjoy, and
That's
it's
right.
your own journey.
That's it.
Thank you so much, Matt. That was fascinating. I could have talked to you for hours.
Oh, I hope we get a chance to do that. Thank you
It
so
it
much.
will
This
be
was
fantastic.
fantastic. Yep. Take
Thank you
care.
so much for coming on. And
Thank you so much.
for anyone who ever wants to rewatch this, simply head to my YouTube channel, where you can find this one and hundreds of others, as well as on any podcast platform. Thank you.
Thank you.